fellow Rotarians and guests. I think if we want to understand where our economy is going, we should understand the industries behind the two biggest purchases we make, cars and homes. It's not hard to follow those two industries. Value Line follows almost 4,000 stocks. Of those, just 10 are auto manufacturers, and just 20 are home builders. MI Homes is one of those 20 home builders. And we are honored today to have as our speaker the CEO of MI Homes, Bob Schottenstein. I first knew and had a chance to work with Bob when we were both practicing law. And then he left the law practice and today leads one of the most important companies in Columbus. He also does a tremendous job of serving our community. He has been a trustee and chairman of the board of The Ohio State University. Today he serves on the board of the Wexner Medical Center and the board of the Ohio State University Foundation. Bob is a member of the Columbus Partnership, serves on the board of Columbus 2020 and the board of Pelotonia. I'm really humbled to introduce a leader of our business community who, in his actions, inspires us all in the way he puts service above self. Bob Schottenstein.
Thank you, Scott, and it's an honor for me to be here with all of you. They've already got my first slide up, so they got a little, now you know what I'm going to talk about. I am going to talk a little bit about housing, and I thought that, that I would try to paint a picture of where we are, where we've been actually, where we are, and where I think we might be going. It's a fascinating industry. It's an industry that, for a lot of reasons, even though it's a fairly simple topic, but it's an industry for a lot of reasons that both in good times and in bad times, I think there's a lot of confusion about what the hell's really going on in the housing industry. And if you just think for a moment about headlines that you read either in our paper or in any other news outlet, you'll see like Columbus, most affordable market, or record sales in Columbus, and then a month later, Columbus sales down. Very confusing, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to just read you just some, and these are just some, of the various data points that exist within our industry. And all of these data points are released monthly and then released again quarterly, and at least every 60 to 90 days they're then revised. And when they're revised, they're often revised in a very significant way to the point where the revisions totally undo what was said before. So just in the new homes area, there's the following data points, and these are all, these are national data points. Measures of affordability, single-family permits, single-family homes that are authorized but not yet started, homes that are started and then are under construction, completions, I don't know what that is. Completions, that's a data point, and I've never really understood it. Sales, I think we know what a sale is. Closings, and oh, by the way, quite often a lot of this information also includes multifamily. But when it's released, it's not clear that it includes multifamily, so when the revisions later come out, you know, if you've got a good memory and a lot of time on your hands, you can sort of figure it out. And then there's a whole lot of data that's issued on a regular basis, locally, statewide, and nationally, on existing home sales. I would suspect that probably 90% of the articles that you read about housing have absolutely nothing to do with what we do. And that's because, at least directly, and that's because 90% of what you read about our industry all relates to existing home sales, the purchase and sale of a used home. In the United States today, and it's pretty much been this way for quite some time, for every new home that is built and sold, there's anywhere from 10 to 12 used home transactions. So stated another way, just to keep the math simple, if you think of 100 new homes being built and sold and closed, in that same market, there's probably 1,000 to 1,500 used home transactions during the same period. So the used home, the resales, think of that MLS book. Think of all the neighborhoods in Columbus and the for sale signs we see from time to time, and days on market, and average price, and comparing Columbus and Cleveland. Almost all of that, when you see that, is about used homes, and has nothing to do with the new home industry, which is the business that we're in. And then there's this whole other bucket of information that deals with multifamily. Generally, but not always, generally the multifamily data that comes out is all for rent, apartments. Not always. Sometimes there's confusion, and for sale attached product, condominiums or attached townhomes, also get stuck into the data. And I've said this before, it's amazing to me that we can send a probe to Mars, but we can't accurately predict month in, month out exactly how many new homes are being sold in any particular market. One of the reasons why there's so much confusion is that many jurisdictions around the country, deed transfers are not a matter of public record. So for example, in the state of Indiana, if you wanted to know how many new homes were closed in Indianapolis last year, you have to count them. You can't get that data from the county recorder's office of the various counties where Indianapolis is situated. Ohio, which is a public record state, it's a lot easier to get that, but from coast to coast, you've got everything in between the Indiana situation on the one hand and the Ohio situation on the other. So, why do I start out by telling you it's totally confusing? Some of the things that I may share with you, you might find quite shocking. Because you may say, well, God, that doesn't make any sense. I just read in the newspaper, at least I feel like I've read it 10 times, how great housing is. And that's right, you may have read that. And it may have to do with the fact that there's very few used homes on the market, and homes are going fast, and maybe prices are rising. And maybe in some markets, sellers of used homes are getting more than the asking price. That could be true. While all that is going on, our industry could be in a completely opposite direction, or not. So, where are we? I'll try to provide more clarity than I have so far. So, where are we and where are we headed? And as I get to where we're headed, I've got some opinions. Which I've shared in some groups before, and I'll try to touch on those. So this first slide, which I talked about a lot of data, as far as I'm concerned, for us, a home builder, this is the only one that matters. This measures on an annual basis in the United States how many new homes were built, sold, and closed in a particular calendar year. And this goes all the way back to 1981. Now, the country was a lot smaller in 1981, but in 1981, there was somewhere north of 400,000, and that's the, let me see if this pointer works here. Yeah, it sort of does. If you go all the way back to here, you can see that there were just north of 400,000 new homes built, sold, and closed in the U.S. And then you can sort of track it all the way over to where we are now. Now, the big jump in the middle, this right here, which really began in 2001 and ended in roughly 2005, was an overheated market, largely propped up by subprime lending, which, you know, if you saw the movie Too Big to Fail, you know what happens. If you lived through that period, you didn't need to see the movie. You know how our country literally almost went out of business as a result of the housing crisis. What this chart does reflect, and what most people believe, is given current population patterns in the United States, household formations, and where we are as a country, we need to produce, just to take care of the what I'll call normal demand, somewhere between 8 and 900,000 new homes nationally a year. We're not. So you can see where we are right now. I mean, look at 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, lower than back in the early 80s. The country's 30 to 40% larger now than it was then. Yet, not that long ago, we were producing less housing stock. That's when companies like ours literally were on life support. Then you can see where we are now. And there's a slightly newer version of this slide that I wanted to get for today, but it just came out. In 2018, the number of new homes that were purchased and sold and closed, built, sold, and closed in the U.S. was approximately 650,000. So 2018, which so many friends of mine have said, God, housing, you guys must be on fire. What a great year you must have had. And we did have a good year. But compare 2018, 650,000, to all this other stuff back here when we were producing 800,000 and 900,000 houses a year. I've used this analogy before. If our industry was a car, Scott mentioned the automobile industry in my introduction. If our industry was a car, today, the good news is all the tires are properly inflated. There's gasoline. The engine's in good shape. It's tuned up well, but it's going about 35 to 40 miles an hour. It was going 110, and the driver wasn't paying attention, back in here. But right now, housing is somewhere probably between third and fourth gear, with a lot of headroom and a lot of unused horsepower, and without crazy lending like subprime and the other, housing has a lot of room to grow. The question is, will it? So that's nationally. What about Columbus? This slide doesn't make me feel that good, and it shouldn't make you feel that good either when you see this. You can see, I talked about the subprime years of roughly 2001 to 2005, and you can see how, and again, this is the same data point, the only one that I think matters. New homes that were constructed, sold, and closed, and this is not, I'm not playing with the municipal boundaries of Columbus. This is the greater MSA of Columbus. Franklin County, southern Delaware County, parts of Licking and Fairfield County, parts of Pickaway County. This is our greater MSA. When people tell you there's 2 million people living in Columbus, they're talking about the MSA. That's what this charts. So if someone wants to know, what does the housing market in Columbus look like today, and how does it compare with last year and the year before and the year before? This shows you. In 2018, the year just finished, almost exactly 3,000 homes were constructed, sold, and closed in the Columbus MSA. That's less than in 1996. Frankly, and I should have brought this information with me, I think that in 1982, there were more than 3,000 new homes built and closed in Columbus, Ohio. Now, there's a few people in this room that were around in 1982, like me, and Columbus is twice the size. Columbus has doubled in population over the last 30 plus years, and we're producing almost half as many houses as we were back then. So you can see where we've come, you can see where we are. I mean, look at those numbers during the Great Recession, which was really Armageddon, not just here in Columbus, but for the whole housing industry. I should have mentioned this from the last slide. You can see the impact of the Great Recession in 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12. 3 out of every 4 home builders in the United States went out of business. 3 out of every 4 home builders in the United States went out of business. Scott mentioned in the intro that Value Line tracks about 20 of us. Back in 2005 and 6, right before the Great Recession hit, there were 21 publicly traded home builders in the United States. Those were considered the 21 largest. By 2011, there were only 12 left. And most of the ones that went down never came back. Now there's roughly 20 publicly traded builders today because some new companies have come on the scene. But so this gives you some indication about where we were, where we've been, the impact of the Great Recession, and where Columbus is today. So we're very competitive. Buckeyes are naturally very competitive people, right? We like to win at everything. So I'm going to give you 4 other cities by comparison that are roughly the same size as Columbus. Columbus is roughly 2 million people today. Austin, Texas is about 2.1 million people. If I had Austin up here in 2018, over 14,000 new homes were built in Austin in 2018. 14,000. Charlotte, North Carolina. The greater Charlotte area is maybe 2.2, 2.3 million people. 11,000. Raleigh, smaller than Columbus, greater Raleigh. 9,000 new homes built in Raleigh. Indianapolis. If we can't beat Indianapolis. 6,000 new homes were built in and closed in Indianapolis last year. Our largest market, our company does business in 16 cities. 15 of them have much larger macro housing markets than Columbus. The only one that's smaller is Cincinnati. Our largest market as a company is in Tampa, Florida. We do the most volume in Tampa as we do in any other city, closely followed by Orlando and Columbus. We're growing rapidly in Austin. Austin will become a bigger market for us than Columbus. We've only been there a few years. Minneapolis will become a bigger market for us than Columbus, probably. We've only been there a couple of years. So I'm just trying to give you some context here. Okay, let me talk a little faster here so we can finish this up on time and have time for questions. This is a very interesting slide, and it's, numbers can be so misleading and so confusing. The left side, this depicts home ownership rate. And the home ownership rate in the United States is a closely watched metric. If you take basically every single household, and you assume that someone either owns where they live or they rent where they live, the home ownership rate is the portion that own versus rent. So if you add up the percentage that own and the percentage that rent, it equals 100%. This goes all the way back to 1969, and the left side, which is the percentages, you can see it's very compressed. It's basically between 62 and 70%, and the dotted line is basically the historical average, which shows the United States over the last almost 50 years now with an average home ownership rate of slightly in excess of 65%. That means the rentership rate in the United States, on average, is 35%. And you can see during the subprime run-up, when housing overheated, the home ownership rate as a percentage didn't really move that much. It went basically from around 65 to 69, close to 70%. You say that's only 4%. But when you're talking about 120 million households, each percent is a gigantic number. And the only way to really think about this is like you think about body temperature. You say, what's your temperature? Well, I'm close to 98.6. I'm 101. Not good. After a couple of weeks, you may not be standing anymore. You got to think about this the same way. This is because the numbers are so large. Each 1% is very, very significant. And you can see how the rate just plummeted in the face of the Great Recession, and now it's on its way back up, and the current rate's right around 64%. So just to explain it a little more, and I mentioned there's about 120 million households in the United States. 40 million of them, about 1/3 is the millennial group, the under 40 cohort. I'm going to talk about them in a second. But each 1% equals 1.2 million households. So if that goes up 1%, that means 1.2 million households, depending upon how many people live in that house, that could be 2, 3, 4 million people, are owning versus renting. I go back to what I said before. The used home The used home business is 10 to 12 times the size of the new home market. So if that moves 1% up, that's 1.2 million more people owning rather than renting. And if roughly 1 out of 10 of those decide to buy a new home, which would be great, that's another 120,000 new homes a year being constructed, sold, and closed in the United States. That's why this is a closely followed chart, because it has such a, I talked about how we need to produce about 800,000 to 900,000 new homes in the US. We're only producing today around 640, 650. That home ownership rate got up closer to that historical average. We'd be up closer to that 800,000 to 900,000. What about Columbus? Columbus is, once again, like they were on my other chart, they're an outlier here. The home ownership rate in Columbus is 60%. You can say, well, that's close to 64. Yeah, but again, think about what that means. There's roughly 800,000, I know there's a lot of numbers here, but I think it's important to get this. In Columbus, Ohio today, the 2 million people consist of about 800,000 households. So each 1% of that home ownership rate is 8,000 households. So if the Columbus home ownership rate went up to the national average, by the way, which is what it is in places like Raleigh and Charlotte and Minneapolis and Nashville, they're all around 63, 64, 65%. If Columbus went up 4 percentage points, and you say each 1% is 8,000 households, that's 32,000 more households owning than renting. If 10% of them bought new, that's 3,000 new homes a year. That takes Columbus's, the production rate of new homes in Columbus from 3,000 to 6,000. Indianapolis isn't beating us anymore. So, and we'd be a lot happier. But I think the city, this is not, there's a lot of apartment developers in this room. My brother's in the apartment business. My dad started out in the apartment business. This is not about apartments versus homes. It's about trying to understand and come to terms with the balance. So, last slide, and I'm probably going to get a question, why is the home ownership rate in Columbus so low? Why is it such a national outlier? And I don't really have a good answer, because other cities with a lot of colleges and universities and other cities with the same relative average median age, you don't see that kind of situation. What is holding us back? There's a lot of talk about affordability today, and people come up and they say things like, why don't you produce more affordable houses? And we go, oh my God, I wish we thought of that. We can't. We simply can't. The home building industry is handcuffed somewhat with trying to produce more affordable houses, which is, I think, the big missing link to where home building is today nationally versus where it should be. And in some cities, it's worse than others. We happen to be in one where I think, quite candidly, there are more challenges and it's more difficult to produce affordable housing. The average price of a new home in Austin and Charlotte and Raleigh and Indianapolis, and I know them well, we do business in all 4 of those markets. The average price of a new home in those markets is 10 to 15% less than it is in Columbus. That means more people can buy. Why is that? Well, it's the second item on this page. Columbus, not the city of Columbus, it's really more the outlying suburbs and townships, has a very, in my view, imbalanced view towards more inclusionary zoning. And easy for me to say it, sounds like, I'm out here politicking and lobbying for the new home industry, but I'm not. I am in a way. I mean, we'd be a beneficiary of it if there was a more, if the development standards here and the zoning standards here and the view towards density here was the same as it is in Indianapolis or in Tampa or in Austin or in Houston or in Minneapolis, we would be using up a lot less ground for the same amount of houses. which means we'd be building less roads and putting in less sewer lines and putting in less water lines. And neighborhoods would be more densely compacted, not inappropriately so. I've said this many times. I think that some of the best neighborhoods ever developed in Columbus, the average density is 4 units to the acre. Bexley, Arlington, Grandview, Worthington. Parts and pieces of those communities are at 4 to 5 units per acre. I don't see not a whole lot wrong with those places. That they continue to carry some of the highest resale values of any of the suburbs in Greater Columbus. But yet, for a company like ours that wants to do a new home development today, we're lucky if we can develop at 2 per acre. Well, if you have to use twice as much ground to get the same amount of houses, that's why the average price here is so much higher. It's just harder. And I talk about lending standards. I think that those are just fine. I don't think we need, I hope we never go back to what got us in trouble and, not that long ago. But the balance of affordability on the one hand and trying to, come up with rational, reasonable zoning standards on the other, those are issues which I think increasingly are going to become more front and center in Greater Central Ohio if the projections are correct, and I suspect they're a lot more accurate than not, that says that over the next 25 years we're going to add another 1 million people in Columbus. If the zoning standards that got us to where we are today are the same ones that we have to deal with going forward, we're going to have to consume 2 to 3 times as much land to build and house those families as we've had to historically. I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think Columbus needs 3 outer belts like Houston. Now Houston, on the other hand, has, it's one of the largest cities in the United States. So there's a reason why they got 3 outer belts. But a city with 3 million people, to have 3 outer belts to get around, it's crazy. And none of us like sitting in our car. And frankly, what's happening within the greater downtown area, from German Village through the Short North to the University District, Clintonville, now Franklinton, other areas, is fabulous. It's great. I mean, I think that the gentrification of some of these neighborhoods and the urbanization and of a lot of areas is just a phenomenal thing for the city. But it may not be for everyone. And that group of people that's coming in here, many may want that, but many may not. And whatever the option is, we want to make certain that we can provide them with the same thing they're going to find in places like Nashville and Minneapolis and other cities they might be thinking of, or we're going to lose. And we don't want to lose. So with that, I think I'm pretty close to, that was fast. I hope it was clear. I'm happy to try to answer any questions. I think this is a moment in time for our city. These are difficult issues. There's a whole lot of people out there who go, he's absolutely right. And I think we should put all that high density over there, not over here. Hey, at some point, I think that this issue is about to become a burning platform for our elected officials and really for all of us. So with that, Mr. Chairman.
Let me comment first before we take a couple questions.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you so much. Robert, thank you so much for speaking today. What we had in December was Foodie Month. We took a light month during that time of year. It was well attended. We just finished the arts. You started our off and on here going forward, the business community speakers. You set the bar very high with very candid comments and some good levity as well as the seriousness of our housing shortage, frankly, of new builds in Columbus. Thank you for all that. We have time for a few questions. I'm going to see hands go up, and I'd only like questions. I know this group's never been guilty of not asking questions for. Going to go to Dan Wander. He's a treasurer. He might know something about the finances of home building.
First, I wanted to say, back when I was on the Genoa Township Planning Commission, we enjoyed working with your company back in the 90s. One of the things we tried to do back then, and I think that you had some developments that you utilized it, was conservation developments. Not really dealing with the overall density issue, but at least cutting down on the number of streets and all the infrastructure. Is that taking off at all in the Central Ohio area?
Maybe a little bit. I think that I think there has to be. I think we have to blow up a lot of the zoning codes, and that's a strong statement. But I think that there needs to be a completely new and different look. And you know, density is a dirty word in a lot of places because people associate density. I think they think it means junk, but it doesn't need to be. And in many of these other areas that I've talked about, where there's greater opportunity to produce more high-density developments, there still are design standards, you know, in terms of, you know, architectural restrictions and exterior building materials and streetscape and open space and so forth. And those are great. I mean, you can manage dealing with that. But by and large, the use of open space or conservation areas in exchange for greater density on that which is left, I'd say there's very few examples where what usually ends up happening is you get the conservation, then on that which is left you get the low density. And so that's like, you know, getting hit twice. I mean, I have strong views about this, but I think that we need to attack it front and center. So,
From this side table, I saw Craig and Mark, and you both Cap Ingalls fellows? Okay. Craig, you first.
Just the millennial factor that you mentioned you were going to say. What is the millennial factor?
yeah, the question was about the millennials. So interestingly, I talked about home ownership rate. The national home ownership rate's around 64 or so%. And historically, the under 40 cohorts always had a lower home ownership rate just because it sort of makes sense. They tend to you know, go from an apartment and then to, in many cases, a house, or they live with their parents or something. The home ownership rate amongst the millennials, I think, they weren't always called that, but so let's just call it the under 40 cohort. I think it's at like a 50-year low. And it's about 6 to 10 percentage points below what it has been historically. So I want to say it's around 40%. And, you know, if we went back 20 years, it would have been like closer to 48 or 50. I could be off a little bit, but I think I'm pretty close. So here again, there's 40 million of them. Each 1%, you know, that's 400,000. If 10% of those bought new, that's 40,000. So if that millennial cohort was buying new homes the way my generation did, we would be at 900,000 to 1 million new homes in this country, just from the lift of that group. There's a lot of reasons being given, you know, getting married later, student debt, frankly, underemployment, wanting mobility. But, you know, I think that, that's definitely an issue. But they're starting to, you know, that's starting to move in a more positive direction, at least from a home ownership standpoint.
I saw one other hand up, and before I get to him, was it student debt for the under 40? Is that why the home ownership's down?
Yes.
Okay.
You didn't miss it.
Okay, Mark?
Mr. Schottenstein, thank you very much for your talk. My question may relate a little bit to Craig's here, in that I wondered if they're not buying your homes, where are these people living? Where are they going to if we have those members within our community? Are they living in apartments? Are they living at home? Maybe you just addressed it relative to Craig's topic here, but won't that be building a pent-up demand?
Yes, I think that, well, the rentership rate amongst millennials is very high, and so is the still living with parents, for starters. And then there's a lot that are teaming up in ways that maybe we didn't see historically, where, you know, in other words, living together, not necessarily married. But yeah, I think it's an enormous wave, potentially, of demand that's coming. I mean, if you think of a wave getting ready to crash to the ocean, I think the 26, 27, and 28-year-old group of people, if you took any 3 consecutive years, is the heaviest populated age group in the United States today. And that group has largely sat on the sidelines when it comes at least to our industry. But at some point they won't, I hope.
Bob, thank you so much.
Okay, thank
Appreciate
you.
it. That was fantastic.
Well, thank you. Well, I appreciate what you guys do.
Able to take a few minutes afterwards if you come
Sure.
Okay, I'll share that.
Thanks, everybody.
With that, this meeting's adjourned.